line with the Federal Department of Labor rules, Washington State began paying overtime to individual providers. Providers are paid their regular rate up to 40 hours in a work week and 1.5 times their rate for any time they work more than 40 hours in a week. Overtime is an important benefit for providers, but each state must stay within the funding given to them by the legislature, so they must control the amount of overtime that is authorized. In order to keep serving the same number of people for the hours they qualify for, the Washington State Legislature created a law that sets limits on the amount of overtime DSHS may pay. After the law was passed, DSHS notified providers of their work week limits. There are some instances when additional overtime may be approved. A client-specific workweek limit approval may be granted to temporarily increase a provider's workweek limit if there is a limited number of providers in the area, there is a limited number of providers able to support a client's complex medical or behavioral needs, a client has specific language needs and there are a limited number of providers who speak that language, a client has an emergency or immediate care need that could pose a risk to health and safety. Approval for a provider to work more than their permanent work week limit must be requested by the client prior to working the overtime hours. In cases where there is a risk to health and safety and the provider has already worked up to their limit, approval can be requested as soon as possible after the hours are worked. All new providers hired after January 2016 have a workweek limit of 40 hours. Some providers have a permanent workweek limit that allows them to work some overtime without the need for prior approval. These limits are defined in state law, and providers were notified by DSHS of their workweek limit. These are providers who worked more than 40 hours a week in January of 2016. These providers have a permanent workweek limit based on the number of hours they worked in January 2016. No permanent workweek limit may exceed 65 hours per week. This video tutorial will cover the basics of a workweek that's limited to no more than 40 hours. Important things to know. A workweek is Sunday, 12 a.m. through Saturday, 11:59 p.m. It can include part of another month. It can include more than one pay period. It includes the hours for all the clients you serve. Keeping track of your work week is key to avoiding unapproved overtime hours. Tips for keeping track of hours. Fill out a calendar for the month before the month begins. If you have a computer and internet access, consider using the calendar tool provided by DSHS. The calendar tool calculates your weekly and monthly hours as you enter hours into the tool. Whether you use the calendar tool or a regular blank calendar, plan your schedule for the month before the month begins. Write the total number of hours you are authorized to work for the month at the top of the calendar. To get an idea of an average day's hours, divide the total number of hours you are approved to work by number of days in the upcoming month that you plan to work. This number is not going to be exact, but by dividing your authorized hours by the number of days in the month that you plan to work, you will have a rough idea of how to start scheduling the number of hours each day. Individual circumstances and needs vary. The number of hours you work each day is going to be based on what the individual client needs and wants. However, you should not work over your workweek limit or the client's monthly authorized hours. Work with each other to plan your schedule. Always add up the number of hours in your work week to make sure it does not go over your work week limit. Add the hours in the whole week, even if part of the week has been paid for in another pay period. Even if part of the week falls in a different month. Even if you work for more than one client. Once you have the month scheduled, double-check the hours by adding them for each week. Next, double-check the monthly total by adding the hours for the month, making sure to leave out hours from the months that overlap the first and last work week. It's your responsibility as the provider to make sure you are working within your work week limit. If you work overtime without DSHS approval, you will receive information and help on how to follow the overtime rules. This is called a contract action. Continuing to work overtime without approval may result in termination of the contract. Keeping track of workweek hours can be tricky, but the basics are simple. Just remember that a work week is Sunday through Saturday, no matter the month or pay period. We hope this has been helpful. For more information or assistance keeping track of your workweek hours, contact the client's case manager.